March 8th, 1983. This is Joe Todd. Interview with Mrs. Irene McCune Treeman.
Mrs. Treeman, when were you born?
I was born September 15th, 1891.
And where were you born?
In Wellington, Kansas.
Who was your father?
Well, my father was, do you want his full name?
Yes, ma'am.
William Clay McCune.
Was he from Kansas?
Let's see where was originally. My father was born in Pennsylvania, but the family came to Chanute, Kansas. But I think he grew up in Chanute, Kansas.
Mm-hmm. Who was your mother?
My mother was Susan Medora Mars, M-A-R-S.
Was she from Pennsylvania also?
No, let's see. Mother was born in Illinois. Bement, Illinois, I think. Mm-hmm. No, she wasn't born in Bement. She was born, I can't remember that. I can't recall the name of the place, but she was born in Illinois.
Do you know when your grandparents came to Kansas?
I don't know what year. My mother was still in school, and she married when she was 18. So, she hadn't finished school when she was married. It was at the time that there was quite, what did they call those things, when everything seemed to be on the up and up money-wise. And my grandfather and grandmother had a little business and had been very successful in it. And so they had a little wad of money, so they decided they'd come out to Wellington, Kansas, and buy stock out in western Kansas. And they put everything they had into that stock, and they had a terrible winter, and the stock nearly all were, they lost just practically everything they had in that. And so they went back to Illinois, my grandfather and grandmother. They didn't stay there after my mother came down here. You see, my mother was there just waiting for Perry for the opening. My father was down here making plans for the opening. Of course, he was close enough that I'm sure he went back and forth because it was, you see, I was born 2 years before the opening. Mm-hmm. And so my grandparents, after my mother came down here, they went back to Illinois to live.
What part of Illinois?
Bement was the town that they came from in Illinois, close to Decatur. Decatur's a much larger town.
Mm-hmm. How come your husband's...
My husband?
Yeah, your husband's parents came to...
No, my husband's parents, let me see, where were they from? I didn't know them nearly as well as I do my own. Mm-hmm. Let me see, where did they come from? Papa Treeman came from, they were from the East. They were from New York originally. And isn't that terrible? That just skips my mind that of where they came from to Perry. Let me think. Oh, Seward, Nebraska. That was their home. I think Papa Treeman's home was Lincoln, and Mama Treeman's was Seward.
Mm-hmm. What about your husband's parents?
That's my husband's parents.
I mean, your father's parents, I'm sorry.
My father's parents.
Yes, your grandparents on your father's side.
Oh.
You said they came from Pennsylvania?
They came from, where was it? I knew my grandmother McCune real well. They came from Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. How come they came to Kansas?
I haven't too good an idea. because I never knew my grandfather. I think my grandfather died before I was born. And I'm not real sure that they came. Yes, oh yes they did. Oh yes they did. I know about them. They lived in Greencastle, Pennsylvania. That was their home. And my grandfather was a building contractor. And he built practically all the buildings, the early buildings in Greencastle, and been very successful. And he got this bug to come west. I guess it was something that was pretty much, in the air. And so he gathered up his family. He had 9 children, I think it was. And they came out by train to Decatur, Illinois. And my father said that he was a little boy, and when they went through Pittsburgh, they had the open ovens of some kind along the track, and he wakened up, and he began to cry. He thought he'd gone to hell. And his mother had a terrible time crying him. But they came out to Decatur, and he, this is my father, he went to school and graduated from high school in Decatur. My grandfather not only had this idea of coming west, but he was going to be a farmer. Of all things, you see, he was a builder, was what he was. But he got a farm close to Decatur, Illinois, and my father graduated from high school in Decatur, Illinois.
What year?
Oh, it was the year, I think it was the year of the, was it a world exposition in Pennsylvania, because I know he was always so proud that a lot of his work was sent to that world
Now there was
exposition in Philadelphia, I guess it was.
probably 1876.
Well,
They had a big centennial.
Well, that. Yeah. Now I think he graduated about that year. He was in high school at least, and then. My grandfather he bought a farm. He didn't do any good on it at all, and had this family of children. So he came out. He decided to come on farther west, and they came to Chanute, Kansas, and he got a farm which is right on the edge of Chanute. I think now much of it is incorporated with the town, and he had a terrible time. He finally found out on that farm that he was no farmer, so he came into town and went back to his building, and he built a good many of the buildings in Chanute and built a lot of houses there. But that was his business, that was what he knew, and he just got off on this crazy idea of being a farmer, and he finally knew that he was no success as that. But the family, they had a tough time of it. My aunts have told me that a pair of shoes was so valuable to them that they would come barefoot to a certain place and leave their shoes under a bridge, and they'd sit down there and put on their shoes and stockings and go on to school. And then when school was out, they'd leave their shoes and stockings there at night. Somebody must have been honest to leave them, and go on home barefoot to save their shoes. They were really, in rather desperate circumstances. Mm-hmm. And I forgot whether there were 9 or 11 children. There were at least 9. Let me see. 9. There were 7 girls and 2 boys. 9 children. No, I'm mistaken. Let's see, Uncle Ed, Uncle Roy. No, 4 boys. There were 7 girls and 4 boys, so there were 11 children. And they all turned out well. The McCune family was a very nice family in Chanute.
And you say that you knew your grandmother quite well?
Oh, yes. An adorable person. My father, there never was anyone who adored his mother like my father did. And she was a very small, she never was. She wasn't much more than 5 feet tall.
What was her full name?
What?
What was her name, your grandmother?
Her name was Catherine Adele, and I have tried several times to think of her maiden name. I don't know what it was, but her name was Catherine Adele. And my father used to send me up to visit her almost every summer because he wanted me to learn her gentle ways. She was she hardly spoke above a whisper. Very, very tiny and quiet. And that whole family adored her. You see, their father died. I never knew him. I never saw my grandfather. But this dear little grandmother, I used to go up to see her every summer.
What year was she born?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Did she ever tell you stories about the Civil War?
What is it?
Did she ever tell you stories about the Civil War?
No. No, she did tell me stories. I know I'll never forget. We were sitting out on the porch. We'd sit out on the porch and talk in the evening. And she said to me, you know, I almost didn't marry your grandfather. She said, I was very much in love with a young man. And she said he would come on a horseback in the evenings. And she said, if I were sitting outside, I could hear his horse coming. And she said, one night I was listening, I heard the horse coming, and I stopped. And the horse stumbled, and he fell off and broke his neck. And she said, I almost didn't, but said your grandfather was an awfully good man. But those are the kind of stories she told me, I think. I can't remember that she ever told me. That's a story that I remember the best. But
did she tell you stories about when she was a little girl?
No, I don't think she did. I don't think she did. I think she came from a very religious background of some kind, but I don't know what it was, because her children all came to Chanute and became very active in the Methodist Church. The McCune family in Chanute are all big Methodists, and it was from the children. And Grandma never joined the Methodist Church, so I think she had some religious connection back there in Pennsylvania that she didn't quite, I don't know, because there was a little Christian church just about 3/4 about in the same block as her house. And after the children all came and went over to the Methodist church, she'd go down to that little Christian church. And I just, I don't know, she was an utterly adorable person.
Mm-hmm.
It's awfully nice to have some. I just was so lucky in my grandparents that because I did have a good little association with them.
Mm-hmm. Were your grandfathers in the Civil War?
Let me see. My grandfather on my mother's side, my mother's father, was in the Civil War.
Did he ever tell you stories about that?
What is it?
Did he tell you stories about being in the Army?
Oh, he used to tell the boys. He used to sit. I didn't listen. I didn't care about war. War is something I hate. But he used to just entertain them. He was the Battle of Shiloh. And he used to tell my brothers a great many stories about the Civil War. But I didn't ever listen.
And your parents came down for the opening of the Cherokee Strip.
My father worked for a Kansas City lumber company, and they wanted an office here in Perry. They wanted a business here in Perry. So my father, he came down into the Cherokee Strip before the opening, so as to get feeling, and he was down here a good deal. And I think perhaps deciding what town, of course, Enid and Perry, and I don't know whether Pawnee was in the opening or not, but there were several towns, and he was considering and deciding, and he decided on Perry.
Why did he choose Perry?
What?
Why did he choose Perry?
I don't know. I don't know why he chose Perry. I'm sure he must have thought it was going to be a good town and a good lumber town. And of course the opening came from Orlando, to this part of the country. And he went to Orlando, but he didn't have a horse. He didn't ride. But there was a train from Orlando on Santa Fe that set out at the time that the opening, when they, I guess, made the whistle at 12 o'clock. This train, so the train got up here, I imagine, ahead of a good many of the riders, most of the riders. And this is a very interesting thing to me. He and my husband's father were on that same train. My husband's father and his brother-in-law were going to start a bank. And the brother-in-law came in on a horse and got a location for the bank. And my husband's father came in on the train and brought the things that were needed to get a bank started. I said I didn't know that was anything but money, but he seemed to have something else. And my father, all he was supposed to do was get off of that train and get a location for the lumberyard, which he did. I think he jumped off the train the minute it stopped, and he got a location down on the, about where they, if you don't know where the old Frisco station is down there, where the Frisco Railroad goes through. Well, the lots that he got were when the Frisco Railroad came in here in about 1905, I think it was. Why, they sold, they took those, I mean, the railroad demanded those lots, and my father closed that lumberyard, and the company from Kansas City decided they wanted to close it, and my father went into another lumberyard. But there were 18 lumberyards. My father was only one of 18 lumberyards here.
What was the name of your father's lumberyard?
What?
What was the name of your father's lumberyard?
What was the name of it? Foster. It was a Foster Lumber Company of Kansas City that he worked for.
Was he
And my and my children's grandfather, they started the first bank. The man that came in, the uncle that came in on horse, he got a lot and had a tent. And so they put up a tent, and they started the first bank in Perry. That was the Farmers and Merchants Bank. And
was your father in the lumber business in Wellington?
he had always been, I think, it worked for, he traveled. He was an auditor. He was a lumberyard auditor, and he traveled all over Kansas. But after he came here, he was auditor for all the lumberyards north of here in the Cherokee Strip, Ponca, Blackwell. He was not only manager of the lumberyard here, but he was auditor for these other lumberyards. Mm-hmm. And he was away from home a great deal because they had to travel by buggy. And he went everywhere, you know. He'd hire a driver and a buggy from the livery stable, and he'd start out on these auditor trips.
How old were you when you came to Perry?
I was 2 years old. You see, I was born in 91, and this is 93.
So you have no memories of Wellington?
Oh, sure I do.
You do?
Oh, sure I do. Yes. You see, I was 2 in September. That was the opening. And you see, my father having a lumberyard and access to carpenters, he got a little house built for us by December. And we came down before Christmas. We came down early in Christmas. I don't remember the train trip, but I remember he met us and took us over to see to his lumberyard. And he had a carpenter who was doing, making things, cabinets, I suppose, and things like that. He had a room for this carpenter. And this carpenter, at the very time that Papa took us in there, was working on a little table that Papa was having made for me for Christmas. Well, of course, I was only 2 years old, and I wasn't supposed to know anything at all. But the fellow evidently spoke a broken English. And when we went out, I said, man talk funny. And Papa said, well, he's a Dutchman that talks Irish. Well, when Christmas came and this little table appeared, I looked at it and I said, Dutchman that talked Irish. And I I've heard this story so often, I know it so well. Either my mother or my father said, she's too smart. And I don't remember that, I'm sure. But I do remember recognizing the table. And my mother used to put me in my high chair, and we had an east window, and I could watch them building the schoolhouse, the first schoolhouse. It was 2 blocks down the street, but there was nothing much between us. And I could see the men up on the scaffolding building. That's the way I was entertained. Part of the time was watching the people building that schoolhouse. But I remember all those things.
Did you meet Joseph Foucault?
Did I meet Foucault?
Yes, the architect.
Yes, I know the man who built the first. No. I never even heard of him. At the time, men in business, I'm sure were conscious of Foucault, but I doubt it, unless you happen to, live close or even board with people close. I'm sure I was well acquainted with all my neighbors, and I was an awful runaway. My mother was chasing me about half the time, but I never heard of Foucault until, you see, I did Dr. Sides' memoirs, and Dr. Sides remembered Foucault very well from Oklahoma City when he had been in Oklahoma City when he built the courthouse down there. And he said, and later, when they tore that courthouse down, they tore it down, he said they were having a dental meeting in Oklahoma City, and there was the dentist there from Louisiana, and he was having a spell because they were tearing that courthouse down. He said that's one of the best I've ever seen of Foucault's, and he was acquainted with, Foucault's work. But they tore it down. Of course, it was Dennis Flynn, I'm sure, that was responsible for our having him build the First National Bank here. Mm-hmm. But that was the first I ever heard of Foucault, when Dr. Sides told me about him.
Did you know Mr. Flynn?
Clifford Lynn.
No, do you know Mr. Flynn, Dennis Flynn?
Oh, Dennis Flynn. Oh, no, I never knew him. I remember the day that we celebrated getting free homes. He got free homes for everybody, and oh my, we had a big celebration. I can remember we went up to somebody's upstairs office and watched the parade, and I don't remember what year that was, but I do remember. That's about all I knew about Dennis Flynn. Mm-hmm.
What kind of chores did you do around the house as a child here in Perry?
What kind of chore did I do? Nothing that I ever had. I was forced to do everything, I'm sure. I was not I was a kid that ran away all the time. My folks were always hunting for me.
Did you do the laundry at home?
Did I do the laundry?
Yeah.
Oh, heavens, no.
Who did?
My mother.
How'd she do it?
On a washboard.
On a washboard.
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. I was not a very useful child. I used to run off to the neighbors. I had one neighbor, a doctor that lived down the street. They had a daughter, a young lady daughter. But my mother always tied my bib to the back of my high chair. And when I get mad at my family, I'd take my bib off and go down to that doctor's office, and they'd see me coming, and they'd give me the biggest welcome, and I'd tie my bib on the chair, and I'd tell them I didn't like my folks anymore, I wasn't going to stay at home anymore, and they just loved to have me. But I think she always sent this young lady daughter up and told my mother where I was, because it was about 2 blocks from our house. But he was our doctor.
What was his name?
Doggett.
Doggett.
And they would feed me about 2 meals. I'd usually stay for about 2 meals, and I was ready to go home. But I was an awful runaway. I think my mother spent about half her time hunting for me. I wasn't at all interested in. Mm-hmm. I never had a doll that had any clothes on it. Mother was always embarrassed because my dolls all had their clothes. I never left clothes on a doll. I guess I was just ready to bathe them. I don't know, but.
What kind of dolls did you have?
Huh?
What kind of dolls did you have?
China-headed dolls.
Mm-hmm. Did your mother make soap?
No.
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 What kind of home did you live in? What kind of house?
Well, the house is right there today.
It is?
Yeah, looks just exactly like. And 2 or 3 years ago, 2 years, maybe not that long, year, a boy bought that house and redid it. The front of the house is exactly like it was when we lived there, but the house was just a little flat-faced house facing north, and it had 2 rooms. What we used as a living room, we had a bed in there, and a bedroom, and a shed kitchen. Well, he took off that shed kitchen, and I think he put a little something on the back. One of the neighbors who who was there when he was fixing the house and would go over, I think said that he put on addition on the back. You can't see it from the front at all, but it has a kitchen and a bathroom. And they said he fixed it up real nice. And I said to him, my goodness, I would think that house, the bottom of that house in the ground would have been rotted out since 1893. And he said, well, that house is in real good condition.
Where is the house? What's the address?
It's the gymnasium. You have any idea where the gymnasium is?
No, ma'am.
You know the street where the schoolhouse is. That's First Street. That's our main street. Well, the gymnasium, the high school building, and then the gymnasium. Well, across the street is a large brick house. And this is a little house right west of that brick house.
What's the address of it? What's the address of the house?
What's the what?
The address of the house?
I don't know. I haven't any idea. First Street is all I know.
Yeah.
And, there's one thing about the house. It's not like it was when we lived there. My mother was 18. My mother was 18 when she was married, but she was still young while I was born. And she was scared to death of the Indians. And my father being a lumberman, he was able to build a high board fence. We had a high board fence clear around that house. And between, of course, it wasn't like the ones they build now because there were pretty good cracks. And that's the way I saw my world, you see, was out of the cracks. I knew I was busy keeping track of what was going on, both at the alley and on First Street.
Mm-hmm. You ever see the Indians around here?
Oh, yes, I sure did. And I thought my mother was absolutely crazy. I couldn't understand why she was so afraid of the Indians, just scared to death of the Indians. And I used to watch them, and they go along in these wagons, our farm wagon, and they'd have 2 or 3 boards across, and it would be, and they always had plenty of kids, and they always had I was a great dog lover. That was one of the things. I was chasing my dog half the time when I got lost. But I'd get out of this place. I was really a humdinger. All of our other kids were pretty good, but I was awful. And I always thought, well, the Indians must be pretty nice. I don't know why Mother's afraid of them, because they always have a lot of kids, and they always have a lot of dogs. They must be nice people, or they wouldn't have those dogs. I never could understand my mother's fear of the Indians. I just never could.
What kind of Indians were they? What tribe?
Oh, Ponca and Oto, I think mostly. Oto, probably. You see, the Oto Reservation, I think, joined.
You ever get to know any of them?
When I went to school, I think the Indians, I don't think the Indians are in school. I taught school in Red Rock, and I had Indian pupils. Then I think was probably as first I ever.
You ever go out to the Indian villages when you were a child?
I can't remember that we ever did while I was a child. We used to go to the Indian dances when I was older, but I can't remember. I don't think my mother would have ever agreed to it. She was so sure the Indians were going to steal her children. She was scared to death of the Indians.
Why was she so afraid of them?
She was afraid they were going to steal her children. I think my mother had read too many stories about white children being stolen. I think that was all in the wide world that was the matter with her. And she just figured that.
Ever have trouble with the Indians?
No, I don't think we ever had any trouble with him, not that I ever know of, or that she ever had any contact with him. But she was just scared to death. She got an awful fear into me when I was loose. Now, when I first went downtown alone, I don't know, it seems to me I was rather young, 6 or 7, I don't know. But anyway, if I saw an Indian, I would go into a store and get under the counter. And I don't think I was really afraid of them. Maybe I had been told they stole you, and so I'd get out of the way so they wouldn't steal me. But I'll tell you another thing. I'll tell you something funny. You won't want to put it down. But my mother, now I was 2 years old when we came here, and my brother was born when I was 4. I had another brother that was born when I was 4. And for 2 years, when I was 3 and 4 years old, my mother wheeled me to town in a baby buggy. These old-fashioned baby buggies, and I was strapped down, and I gave a promise that I would not get out of that buggy unless it was absolutely necessary. And Mother wheeled me to town because she said that was the only way she could keep track of me. Wheels to town. She'd take me into a grocery store and stop me right with the candy counter. I knew all kinds of, they had candies in little tin pans and candies all fixed up fancy every way. But I was wheeled. There's something interesting about that too that I want to tell you. You see, when I wrote Dr. Side's memoirs, he said that when he came here, he came in I think about 1896, that they had no grade levels for the streets downtown. They had never made any grade levels. And he said a building would be built, and then they'd build a sidewalk out just the level of the building. Well, maybe the next building will have a different grade level. They built their sidewalk out, so he said the west side of the square was just a series of step down, step down, step down. Well, I always remembered that my mother, when we came to the northwest corner of the square, when we came onto the square, and my mother always wheeled me along the edge of the street. And I always wondered why she didn't wheel me on the sidewalk. And I never knew until Dr. Sides told me that was the reason. And you see, she'd go down as far as the store she wanted to go into and wheel me along the street till we came to where the store we wanted to go into was, and then she'd wheel me in. And I never knew. I always wondered why she wheeled me down the side of the street. I think I wanted to ride on the sidewalk, but I didn't get to.
When did you say it was your uncle and your father built the first bank?
My husband's father.
Your husband's father. What was the name of the bank?
Farmers and Merchants.
Is it still here?
It was closed. That bank was closed when Roosevelt closed the banks. They had sold it by that time. They didn't own it then, but that was the one bank that was closed in Perry.
Where was the bank located?
Well, it was right at the southwest, next door, the second door on the southwest corner of the square. My uncle got, Uncle Hiram, he was my uncle after we were married, he got a block off. You see, this is what a lot of people did. They thought they were on the square, and because it wasn't well enough marked, and he thought he was getting on the square, but he got a block off, a block south, and that's where they set up their little tent and put up their first bank. And then Uncle Hiram got this lot on the southwest next to the corner, southwest, and got that building up very quickly, as quick as he could.
It was just a
wooden building.
Wooden building?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did they build a brick building later on?
Yes, they built. The brick building is still there.
It's still there?
And the vault of the bank is still there. They never have taken the vault out of that building.
What's in that building now?
Shoe store, I think, or something. I don't know, some sort of it. I don't remember. It's used for most anything.
Who were some of the prominent people in Perry when it first started?
Oh goodness, I knew a lot of them. I'm sure I could think of if I can think of them. That I, as a child, would be. I don't know. You're thinking of people that I would have thought were prominent. Mr. Welch had the first newspaper. They lived in the next block, and I knew Mr. and Miss Welch very well. And Dr. Doggett, of course, they were my friend. And right across the street from us, I think the man's name was Pitzer, Pitzer, and I think he was a postmaster. I believe he was a postmaster. I'm not real sure about. I played with a little girl, but I'm just not too sure about that name. And there was a lawyer lived next door to us, but Mother said she always saw to it I didn't bother the lawyer very much because she didn't think he much enjoyed the kind of a kid I was.
What was his name?
I don't remember. I knew for a long, long time. He was an early day lawyer. I can't remember. I can't remember. Mr. and Mrs. D.B. Jones. Now, I don't know what his business was. They lived across the alley from us, and we didn't have a cave. But in the storm seasons, we went over across that alley to their cave practically every night. It looked like we were going to blow away. We were eternally going. And one night there was a real bad storm, and a lot of stuff was blown out in the alley. But I think we went barefoot. I don't know. But the next morning, my father looked at me. He said he didn't see how we didn't ever came across that alley without hitting a nail. None of us did. But D.B. Jones. Then next to him was C.W. Ransom, and he was a lawyer. They lived across the alley from us. And I didn't know Mr. Ransom or Mr. Oh, I knew D.B. Jones. He was a very friendly man. But Mr. Ransom, I didn't know him at all. And Henry Johnson. Henry Johnson lived across the alley and down. But I remembered always, and I always intended to tell Henry about this, and I never did get around to it. He was married then to another woman than Ethel L. Of course, this is a painting of Ethel L. Johnson's, and she was a dear friend of mine. But he was married to somebody else then. And in those days, of course, there was no plumbing, and everybody had a series of what they call slop buckets. And so I was so observant that I knew that Mr. Johnson was the only man in the neighborhood who emptied the slop buckets. And I thought Mr. Johnson must be one of the nicest men in the world. Now, I would see him, but I never. And one time my uncle came to visit us, and he was a slender man like Mr. Johnson. And when the cab stopped out in front of our house, I went into the house screaming, "Oh, Mr. Johnson is coming to see us." But it was my uncle. I don't remember that I ever saw Mr. Johnson to speak to him, but I sure saw him carrying out the slop buckets. And I always meant to tell him about that, and I don't think I ever did. Well, it was the people in the neighborhood that I at least knew their names.
Who was the first mayor of Perry?
Who was the first mayor of Perry? I think I probably have known, but I don't think I can remember. Holland. I'm not sure, but what Holland may have been first. No, Brogan. Oh, no. Brogan. Let me see. You see, Brogan Street is named after one of the first mayors. I don't know whether he was the very first one. And then the old house that's over here the house, what was the name of those people? That, I think, was the first mayor, and I did know his name. Some old women own that house, and it looks like a jungle. You can't hardly find the house. And that was as they told me, that was where the mayor lived. Oh, what was his name? But Brogan Street You know about Rogan Street? You know, it's down on the square, off the square. And now, either Brogan was first or second mayor, but he was a very early mayor. But it seemed to me like there was a mayor before him, but I can't think of his name.
Is the old courthouse still on the square?
Oh, yes. You see, the courthouse, it was a big wooden building, almost as large. I mean, it looked almost as large as the one we have now. And the J.M. Richardson Lumber Company of Oklahoma City built it. And they had a rental deal with the county on it. And the rental deal was so set up that when they had finished this rental deal, the county owned it. That was the way they bought it, was by a rental deal from the J.M. Richardson Lumber Company. But the post office, I think, is more interesting. The post office was where it is now, and it was the prettiest little stone building. And it was built by the merchants on the square. And they always said it was put on the northwest corner because the merchants on the north and west side were more generous. They put it up, and they rented it to the city for $1 a year. And then halfway between the courthouse, between the post office and the library was where the townsite buildings were, where the well, that's where the townsite, what do they call it? They had another name for them. Well, it was the buildings where you went to make arrangements, you know, to get property. And they were there for, I noticed in something I had kept, that they were there for 16 years. They were there a long, long, old
Would that be the land office?
Land office. The land office and the townsite board met, I think, in the land office. Mm-hmm.
Who built the present courthouse?
Who built? I don't know. The county did it, but I don't know who built it. I don't know.
Do you remember the Spanish-American War? Hearing about it?
Oh, to a certain extent. We had a man that Mr. John Shanafelt, and he had a bookstore, newspaper stand in the old post office as long as the city rented it. After the city took it over, they cleared it out. But he was there. Well, he had a brother that came here, Dick Shanafelt. Oh, he was terribly good looking. And he was very much in love with or we thought he was, with one of the teachers in the school. And she was the prettiest teacher there. Oh, I was at the age then, I was very much interested in romance, I'm sure. And I was very much interested in the fact that Dick Shanafelt and this gal were sweethearts. And on the 16th, we always have had a big parade, you know. And there was a woman here, Dr. Doggett's wife. She's very artistic. And she always decorated a buggy or something beautifully. Well, she decorated something. And this Dick Shanafelt, I guess in his new uniform, stood up. And I can still, that's the only thing I remember about Dick Shanafelt. I can see him standing up on that thing as the parade went around the square. But he was our main, I'm sure there were other men that went, but Dick Shanafelt was the big hero.
Were there any big celebrations during the Spanish-American War? Any parades, demonstrations?
Well, I don't remember anything but that. I remember that was just the 16th celebration. We always had a parade, you know, decorated parade. And I remember we were located as he came up from the east on the north side of the square, and he was standing on this, I suppose in his uniform. I can't remember that, but anyway, that's the only way I remember Dick Shanafelt. And I had no particular connection with the Spanish-American War, you know. I mean, I don't remember we ever had any of the family in the Spanish-American War.
Was there a big celebration when the new century came in, 1900?
They might have, but I don't remember. I don't remember.
What school did you go to in Perry?
What school? I started to the Perry Public School. I was only 5 years old. My father was eternally on the school board, always on the school board. And so the primary teacher was a good friend of my mother. I was large for my age, all my friends were going to start to school. And oh, I wanted to start to school so bad. So the teacher came along one day and stopped to visit with my mother. And my mother told her about how crazy I was to start to school. And you see, my birthday was the 15th of September. I think it was the day before school started. And she said to Mother, well, if I don't have an overcrowded room, you just send Irene. And so she sent word to Mother she didn't have an overcrowded room. So I started to school the day after I was 5 years old. So I got a head start on going to school, you see. And she used to walk down the aisle, and I always sat sideways in my seat. I'd sit with my feet in the aisle, and she would tell me over and over again, put your feet back under your seat. Well, one day she walked down the aisle and went past my seat and said, Irene, put your feet back under your seat, which I did. But she was watching, you see, and the minute she went by me, I stuck my feet out in the aisle. She had a ruler in her hand, and she whaled away and hit me on my shins. I got up and walked out and went home. I just walked out of school. I'm never going back. But the next morning, you couldn't have held me, you know. I was there.
What was the teacher's name?
Miss Smythe. She was a primary teacher here for years, Smythe.
What was your favorite subject?
In school?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, reading, of course. I'm sure I liked reading. I was always good at numbers. You see, I was an only girl in a family of 3 boys. And my oldest brother was the dumbest thing at numbers, I guess. And my father, being a lumberman, you know, numbers were very important to him. And my brother had to bring his number work home every night, and Papa had to work with him. And Papa said to me, well, why don't you bring me? No, I don't need to. But numbers were always easy for me. Even when I got to high school, algebra was my favorite subject. I loved, the originals in algebra were just like a puzzle to me. I just had a great time with them. And my father, he wanted me to go to college and get to be a mathematics teacher. But I wasn't a bit interested in that. I wanted to teach English if I went to college. I thought mathematics was dull. Most kids didn't like it.
Did you go to college?
Oh, I went around to college 2 or 3 times. I never did do much with it.
Where'd you go?
I went to Edmond. I had to go to Edmond to teach. You see, I taught. And I went to Edmond. Well, before that, you see, in 1908, the library was opened. And so I had heard, I don't know, I had an aunt who lived in Los Angeles, and when she knew that I had library aspiration, she said, well, they gave examination in the Los Angeles library once a year, and if you passed that examination, they gave you a job. So now this was while the library was being built. So I went out there and took this examination, but I didn't pass. They told me afterwards it was no particular discredit to me because they gave only native Californians, really. There were enough native Californians, and they didn't pass anybody else unless I suppose they're extremely brilliant, and I wasn't. And so I didn't get it. Well, I started to the University of Southern California. I went 1 semester.
What year was this?
Oh, heavens, about 1907 or it must have been about 19. No, I graduated from high school in 1907. This must have been, no. The library was built in 1908. That's what's on the front of the building, but I don't think it was finished by then. This was about I imagine it's about 1909. I don't know. I don't remember dates. And anyway, I started, well, one day I was out at my aunt's at lunch, and her cousin on her husband's side was there, and she was in the cataloger of the library at Long Beach. And she said, we have a wonderful training course in our library, and if Irene would like to, and this was just at the end of the first semester out at USC. So I went down there and took this training course. It was a 6 months course. And so I finished it just as the library here was finished. And I was the first librarian at that library. Well, you see, the library only stayed open about 3 months. It was closed, locked, and I was only getting $12 a month. That was my immense salary. And I went down there. They never started the furnace. The furnace had never been started since the thing was open. We had a little pot-bellied stove up on the main floor, and I had a chair and table there and dispensed books from that. We didn't have the library was not furnished. And so I applied for school, and a teacher got married or something, wanted to leave, and I taught the last half year.
Where was that?
I don't know whether I'd gotten a certificate or not. But
Where was that school?
Here in Perry. It was in the old Methodist church building. The old Methodist church building used to be, well, where the elementary, where the elementary school is, it goes through, a whole block. Well, the First Methodist Church was on that corner, and they had moved down to where the Methodist Church is now, but they had left a part of the old church. And so they had made 2 schoolrooms out of it, and they had an overflow that year. That was the way I guess I got in, because they had this overflow. And I went in and taught there.
What did you teach?
I think it was about 3rd and 4th grade. I could tell you some very interesting people here in town that went to school to me. They seem as old as I am now.
When did you return from California?
Oh, I never went to California again except on visits.
I mean, when did you come back?
Oh, when I come back from California? Yes. Well, I came back to be librarian, you see. I'd taken my library course out there, and I had big ideas. I had big ideas of cataloging and ordering, and they had really trained me with it. They just didn't. You see, of course, this cousin of my aunt's was the cataloger, and because she was cataloger and I lived with her, they took us back. And the fact that I was coming back to be librarian at a new library, the whole caboodle of them just did everything they could to give me help in getting a new library started. I had wonderful ideas, but we didn't have any money. We didn't have any money. I got $12 for going and sitting down there and dispensing books. That's all. I don't believe that we ever bought a new book while I was there. I was only there 3 months. And then they locked the library, you see.
How come?
The mayor, you see, we had a mayor who was very much opposed to building the library. He said what we needed was a city hall. We didn't need a library. And so one day he came over there, and I saw him down there, and the janitor came in. I did have a janitor. And I said, go find out what's going on. And so he came back to me. He said, well, the mayor is changing the locks on the doors. Well, one of the members of the library board was a businessman right across the street. I said, go get Mr. Christoph right away and bring him over here. So the janitor, he whistled across the street and brought Mr. Christoph. Well, the mayor was a little man. I don't think he was any taller than I am. And Mr. Christoph was at least 6 feet tall. And he came and he stood on one side, and I could hear them. The doors were open. No, the door couldn't have been open because he was changing the lock. Well, anyway, I could hear it. And Mr. Christoph would say, you can't do that, Jim. And Jim would say, but I'm doing it. And he changed the locks on both the front and the back door. Well, the library board met that night or the next day. My mother was on the library board, and I think she went right along with them. And it was the next day, because they had gone over and had tried all the windows, and they were found the window to the furnace room was open. So they called me up the next day and asked me if I would go through the furnace window and get into the library and go up and sit at the table and hold possession. Well, I was 18 years old. I know that much because my father said, no daughter of mine is going down and go through anybody's basement window to hold down anything. That's all there is to it. You're just plain not going to do that. So I sent my resignation to the board. But the man that wrote Perry, the Pride of the Prairie, he came up here and talked to me a lot about the library. I told him that. He put it in that I went through the window and held down the library. And when I went down to get my copy of the book, he said, well, you know, I put it in that you went through the window. And I said, what, Mr. Cunningham, that isn't true. I never went through the window. I resigned. And he said, it was just too good a story to change. So it's in here that I went through the library window, held down the library. Well, what they did get the keys to the library, and they did set up a table down there and just hired somebody to go down there and exchange books. That was all. Didn't do anything. And the library was in a terrible state for a long time. But they had agreed with Mr. Carnegie when he gave that money that the council would set up a certain percent of the income of the town for the upkeep of that library. They just didn't do it until they were.
When was the library built?
Hmm?
Was the library built?
1908 is the but I'm sure there was 1909 at least before I came back.
Did Mr. Carnegie come down here?
Hmm?
Did Mr. Carnegie ever come down here?
No, I know. I met Mr. Carnegie. He visited our library, the Long Beach Library. Oh, I had a great time out there. I was, you see, everybody in the training class had a certain section of the books to straighten. And the day that Mr. Carnegie came to visit the library, I was straightening the section in which his books were. Well, Mr. Carnegie, I can see him yet. He came up across the lawn on a walk. Of course, we were all watching. Little man. And just about the time he got to the door of the library and said, oh, we must have a book of his for him to autograph. And I said, oh, I can get you one, I can get you one. And because his books were in the section I was fixing that day. And I went and got her a book. And he autographed it. Well, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe, I don't know. I've been in California a lot of time. And one time I wanted to go down and see the library. I went in, and there in a glass case is that book that I picked out and Mr. Carnegie autographed.
Did you tell him?
Huh?
Did you tell him?
I'm sure I must have. I'm sure I did. I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't remember.
What kind of man was he like?
Huh?
What was Mr. Carnegie like?
What was Mr. Carnegie like?
Yeah.
I don't think he said enough that you found out, Holly. He seemed like a very silent sort of man. Pleasant face, a very pleasant face. But I can't remember. I may not have gotten close enough to him to have heard if he said anything. I can't remember. But he came, of course there were a bunch of people with him. And I think I was even introduced to him. I think the library board were there and the librarian, but a little training class. I don't think we got to shake hands, even though I picked the book. That was enough honor for me.
To regress just a bit, when you were in elementary school, what kind of games did you play?
What kind of game? Why, Pum Pum Pull Away?
What's that?
You know about Pum Pum Pull Away?
No, ma'am.
Never played it?
No, ma'am.
Oh, goodness, you're awfully modern. Well, we used to play Pum Pum Pull Away. That was one of our great. And we had a little boy in our room that was a cripple. And he always had to go on with his crutch. And it was just amazing how fast that boy could go with that crutch. It was a real, if one of us caught him, you see, they'd take turns, the girls would catch the boys and the boys would catch the girls. And if one of us caught him, oh golly, that was really something because and of course his crutch was in the way. You were a little afraid you were going to do something to that. But
well, how do you play Pom Pom Pull Away?
Well, you line up and the girls all get in the middle, and the boys get on the side, or the boys all get in the middle, the girls get on the side, and then at a certain, they run. All the girls run, and the boys try to catch a girl. Well, of course, if you had a boyfriend, he always tried to catch you. It was that was awfully nice, for that may have been the way you got your boyfriend. But it was a very exciting, nice game.
But how do you win?
Well, I think we just turn around, the girls catch the boys. I think that was all. Oh, I think if a girl got through, she got to run with the boys. Or if a boy got through, he got to run with the girls or something like that. I don't remember that. But anyway, oh, it was very exciting. And we played that an awful lot. Of course, the boys all played tops. And a lot of the girls played tops. I never was any good at it. Marbles. We played marbles. You see, I had 3 brothers, so I played a good deal the same thing that the boys did. And I played marbles. But I was never good at tops, I know. The boys could spike the tops. They could throw them so hard. I never was any good at that. But let's see, what other games did we play? That Pum Pum Pole was our big game, though. We played that an awful lot. And this crippled boy, I wanted to tell you.
What was his name?
His name was Richard Schultz. And his father was a blacksmith. And they were from Germany. And they had a very nice home down in the south part of town, not far from his place. The home is still there and it's in good condition. But my father, as I told you, was eternally on the school board. Oh, how I used to wish you see, if I thought a teacher didn't like me, I always thought it was because my father was on the school board. Or if a teacher did like me, I thought it was because my father was on the school board. So I was always wishing to goodness he'd get off the school board. But it seemed like he's always on it. Well, this Mr. Schultz, the blacksmith, he had this boy Richard and a daughter Elizabeth. And they seemed to have little difficulties in school. So Mr. Schultz would talk to Papa, because Papa had the lumberyard down below farther down the street than the blacksmith shop. So one day, old Mr. Schultz told Papa something bad. And Papa said, well, we'll go right up. And Papa took him with his blacksmith's apron on up to the schoolhouse to tell the superintendent what had happened that he thought was unfair to his children. And Elizabeth, his daughter, told me she never got over that. She said, I never got over the fact your father brought my father up there in his blacksmith's clothes to school. She said, I never felt so disgraced in my life.
How come? What was the incident?
Huh?
What was the incident?
I haven't the least idea what in the wide world he thought that his kids were being discriminated against or something like that. But this Richard went on, and as far as I know, he left the largest
His estate.
He left, I don't know whether there's ever been a larger estate. He went into banking business. He was a perfect genius. He had a bank at Red Rock. He was interested in a bank or two here. He was a perfect genius at money. And he left one of the largest estates that's ever been left in Noble County. Mm-hmm. That crippled boy. Yeah. He never married. And he was crippled. He used a crutch. He used a crutch always. Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth, the daughter, went back to Germany and married and lived there.
Where was the blacksmith shop located?
Who was what?
Where was the blacksmith shop located, Mr. Schultz's?
Well, it was about. Let me see. I don't go down that way often enough. You know where it was a block off of the square, off of the southwest corner of the square. I think there's a corner lunch. I think there's a little lunch place. I think that's where Mr. Schultz's blacksmith shop was.
You ever go down there?
Do I? No. I don't go any place.
I mean, when he was working in the blacksmith shop.
Oh, no. Of course, we all knew Mr. and Miss Schultz. Miss Schultz was a very nice woman. And they had this pleasant home about a block farther west. And the house is still there in good condition. Elizabeth came back here a good many times. And, of course, Carl Ham was administrator. He was all mixed up in Richard Schultz's money. And Mrs. Ham told me that one time when Elizabeth was here, she wanted to have a coffee and have whoever Elizabeth remembered from her girlhood, and Elizabeth didn't want to have it. I ran into her once, and she seemed glad to see me on the street. That's the only time I ever saw her.
How come she returned to Germany?
She married there. She married there, and she married somebody from Eastern Germany. She had quite a time getting out. They did get out of the occupied part of Germany, but that was where her husband.
What year? When did she return to Germany?
When did she go back to Germany? Well, I think when she was quite a young girl. I think they sent her back quite a lot. I don't know whether she went to school there. I don't know what, but they had relatives there, and I know Elizabeth she went back quite a good deal. Maybe she and her mother both. I don't remember. But anyway, she married there and married quite young.
Do you remember the Depression of 1907, 1908?
Of 1907? I didn't know there was one.
Yeah, the banks closed for a while.
Were they?
Yeah.
That's the year I graduated from high school. I don't remember.
It wasn't as bad as the 1930s.
I remember the one in 29, wasn't it? Or, well, whenever it was. I remember that in the books we had to buy our groceries with.
Well, do you remember your uncle and your grandfather's bank closing at that time in 1907?
Do I remember what?
Do you remember the bank closing in 1907 and 1908?
Well, you see, in 1907, I wasn't any connection of that family.
Okay.
We were married in 1916.
Okay.
So I knew the Treemans and I knew the boys, but of course, Ralph was 7 years older than I was, so he had quite a fling with several different gals, and I was just lucky that I got him.
What did you do on Statehood Day?
What?
What did you do on Statehood Day, November 16th, 1907?
I think we were quite happy about it as far as I can remember. I don't remember what we did. I don't remember.
Was there a big parade here?
What year was that?
1907.
That was the year that I graduated from high school. Isn't that terrible? I don't have any great remembrance of it at all. Nothing that particularly impressed me, evidently, except that I know I was very glad to have Oklahoma State. I don't remember.
Did you? Let me see. President Roosevelt came to Oklahoma in 1903.
Was it? Well, I remember we went down to the train, and I think he waved from the train or something. I don't remember that he got off here. I was such a rank Republican. I don't think I was too interested in Roosevelt. I was in school. We fought, you know.
And this is Teddy Roosevelt.
What?
This is Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, Teddy Roosevelt. Did he ever come here?
I think he came to Oklahoma City once.
Yes, he was in Oklahoma City. A lot of people, Arab people, went down there to see him, but I didn't.
Yeah.
No, but I was always. We used to just have the biggest fights every. I was always a fighter in election. I was always a red hot Republican. I don't know why. And I said, do the kids up here in school? I was talking to some youngster from school not very long ago. I said, at election time, do you kids up here have regular fights? And I don't, no. Why, we used to, make up the ugliest fried cats and something else are good enough for Democrats, and horrible things, and sing them and yell them, and we had regular. I don't think we even played Pum Pum Away. But we really celebrate every election.
Were there any blacks in Perry in the early
Oh,
days?
plenty of them. Plenty of the dear, dear people. Oh, some of my dearest friends were blacks. You see, my mother always used black help. And when we were children, our babysitters was a preacher down where the old sandwich place down there on Fur. That was where his little church was, and he was a preacher. What was his name? And Millie, his wife, and they used to come and were our babysitters, and blacks at that time, and I suppose it's still the same way. I don't know, surely not. But they were never allowed any place with a kitchen. But we always had heating. Our cook stove was a heating stove, so our kitchen always was a nice warm place. We used to just beg our parents to go someplace because we just loved to have Millie and Lee. Well, his name wasn't Leo. Millie and I can't remember his name. And they'd sing to us and tell us stories, and we just loved both of them. And then. Of course, as we grew older and didn't have to have babysitters, mother her help was always black. Mm-hmm. We always had a washwoman or somebody that ironed for us, or house cleaning, anything. My mother, she liked black help, and we were just fond of them. And we had one old black woman, though, that was really funny. She worked for us for years, and she had a husband that had a farm out in the country, and she would buy calves and put them out there, and he'd let them die. He was just no good. But he'd come to town every Saturday night to get her, and she worked for Mother on Saturday afternoon, so he'd sit outside and he'd just keep calling and calling and calling. And she'd mumble, she'd grumble. And I said to her, Auntie, listen, why don't you hurry up and get through, because Unc's awful anxious to get back home. And I said, he's getting old and childish, and you ought to be nice to him. And she said, old and childish your foot, he's getting old and devilish. Well, he died. So Andy decided she was going out to somebody she knew in Washington or California. So Mother thought she ought to help to fix her up to go. So Mother fixed a dress and a hat that she thought would be proper for Andy to wear at the train. And I remember the hat particularly. I think maybe I helped Mother make the hat. Well, anyway, after she was gone, I said to one of her friends one day, I said, well, did she get off? We didn't call her Auntie. I can't think what we called her. And she said, oh, yes, you should have seen her. Baby doll dress, baby doll hat, baby doll shoes. She didn't wear what Mother fixed for her at all, I'm sure.
What kind of stories did Millie tell you?
What?
What kind of stories did Millie tell you?
You said, Millie,
yes.
What kind of stories would she tell us? I don't have any idea. I think they sang to us a lot. I can't remember so much the stories, but I do remember their singing to us.
Where were they from?
I don't have any idea. They lived here all their lives. They both of them died here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any idea where they came from. I don't remember that I ever asked any of them.
Where'd you meet your husband?
Where'd I get my husband?
Where'd you meet him?
Meet him?
Yes.
Oh, I'd known him for an awful long time. I was trying to think how I began to go with Ralph. I can't remember. Ralph, he was 7 years older than I was. And I pretty much went with the boys that I grew up with, or the boys that I'd known that were close to my age. He really belonged to the crowd that my older brother, who was 5 years older than I was, belonged to his crowd. They were, if they ever looked at us or paid any attention to us, why, we were real flattered. Yeah, and if any of them asked us for a date, why, that was really something. And I'm trying to think. I don't believe I can remember the first date that I had with Ralph. And I don't believe, you see, he and his mother got a 7-passenger Studebaker car. It was one of the earliest cars in Perry. A 7-passenger Studebaker for his mother and him. And I think his mother bought it in a bargain. Well, anyway, I kind of believe that maybe the first date I had with him was in that 7-passenger Studebaker.
Were you chaperoned?
What?
Were you chaperoned?
Did we have a chaperone? No, oh, no. I never had a chaperone.
Mm-hmm.
I was always pretty well able to take care of myself. My father was quite particular who I went with. I never had a second date with a boy that he didn't approve of. And my father was the one that guided my steps much more than my mother did.
Where did you go on dates?
Oh, where did we go? Oh, usually on picnics or a picture show, I suppose. They had picture shows then. Where did we go on dates? Oh, we'd get together. Of course, we had little clubs and things, and we'd have things. And, but after, of course, when I began going with Ralph, because I had 2 or 3 dates with him, they always had a horse and buggy because they lived out at the edge of town. And they always had a horse and buggy. And I know the first 2 or 3 dates I had with him, we went I went in the horse and buggy. So he got this 7-passenger Studebaker, and I think I was pretty well in the picture at that time. And I know one night he, pretty soon after he got the car, my mother was a widow and his too, and he said, tell your mother to be ready when I come down, and mother's going to come with me, and I'm going to take the 2 mothers for a ride. Well, he went down, and oh yes, I guess it was paved around the square then. But anyway, he went round and round the square, and he'd take the corners. I think they pretty nearly fell out. And I said to him, Ralph, listen, can't you slow down for the corners? I said, I think your mother and my mother are real uncomfortable in that back seat, the way you go around her. He said, I never have learned to drive the darn thing slow.
When'd you get married?
Well, we were married in 1916. And we had a little home wedding.
Who married you?
Our preacher, a Presbyterian preacher.
What was his name?
What?
What was his name?
Millard, M-I-L-L-A-R-D. And Ralph told him to make it short and sweet, that he was sure it would be all right, and he just wanted it short and sweet.
Where'd you go on your honeymoon?
We went to Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed at a nice hotel, which was a great treat to me. I don't think I'd ever stayed in a hotel before in my life. And he had a cousin out in Kansas City, and we stayed, I think about the end of the first, maybe we were just gone a week. I don't know. Well, anyway, he called his cousin up. Well, his cousin immediately came down and got us and took us out to his house. And he didn't want us to stay. He had a great big old house. He was a painter. He painted scenery for theaters, curtains and side deal. That was his business. He was a painter. And he must have had some artistic ability. And he had a great big old house. And he said, no use for you kids stay down there at the hotel. You come on up to our house. Well, we were having such a good time with him, and he had fixed up so many things for us to do. And he had a little boy. Well, the little boy thought that I was Ralph's mother. And his grandfather had been there Christmas, and his grandfather took his teeth out and put them in a cup at night. So one day at the breakfast table, he said, "Do you take your teeth out and put them in a cup at night?" We thought that was awful funny. I know. But he never could quite get me straight. He thought I was Ralph's mother. He thought Ralph was about his age. And, oh well, we had a very happy honeymoon and came back and lived for, you see, his mother lived alone out at the edge of town. They had a great big old house that that his father had built.
Is it still there?
But
Is it still there?
yeah, no, it's been completely. I think the whole house was used again, but it's been modernized and changed entirely. You would never recognize it. It was just a straight, 2.5 story, because they had a large attic as well as 2 full stories. And it was a very nice house. And we lived there, for 2 or 3 years, I guess. And my mother lived in town too, you see. So we lived back and forth from his mother to my mother. We had places, both places. And it wasn't a very satisfactory way to live, but we didn't have any children for 3 years. And so we had a good deal of freedom, And then his mother bought this house across. We built this house, and then his mother bought that house across the street and sold her house. And that was 60 years ago. We've lived in this house 60 years.
Did you do any work for the war effort in World War One?
Yes. My father was chairman for the Red Cross in Perry all during the war. And we had the basement of the library had never been used by the library. So it was all set up as sewing quarters. And I don't know how many rooms there were down there. And they had quite a big number of women sewing, making bandages and that sort of thing. Well, there was another girl that was married just about the same time I was, and she and I had talked together. And they wanted us to set up, had one corner of one room, and the drugstore supplied us with things that boys would want in a duffel bag, and the women that sewed made duffel bags, and we had everything to outfit them. So a lot of people came, and filled them for presents for the boys. The girls' sweethearts would come there and fill them, and this girl and I ran that duffel bag corner.
What kind of thing did you put in the duffel bag?
All sorts of things from the drugstore, and I imagine some candy too. I don't know, but we filled the duffel bag. But it was mostly things from the drugstore, I think.
How many boys from Perry went to the war?
I don't know. I wouldn't have the least idea.
Did they all come back?
Oh, no. No, we lost a number of boys. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to say that I can't tell you. My 2 brothers, 2 of my brothers, my brother next to me, my oldest brother, who was 5 years older than I was, he had never been very strong. His health had never been too good, and they turned him down. But he was Red Cross chairman, I think it was, for Tulsa. He lived in Tulsa, and he was very active in the war effort over there.
What was his name?
He had, at that time, they had, it was a meat packing business. He was in with a man, but I was trying to think what business Charlie went over there in. But at that time, he and this man had a meat packing business, and
was his name Charlie McCune?
Charlie McCune. Mm-hmm.
Is he still living?
No, he's been gone a long time. And then my brother Murray was the one who was just younger than I, and he lost his right arm at Saint Mihiel in France. And then my brother Ralph, what did Ralph do? He was in the army. He was the most enthusiastic one of all. But I was trying to think what Ralph did in the army. I think he was just in the regular ranks, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I was trying to think if he went overseas. Oh yes, he went overseas because he went to see Murray in the hospital. Yeah. Oh yes. Ralph, you see, my father was lumberman, and Ralph was the only one of the boys that had taken any particular interest in the lumber business. And so he had worked with my father. Well, they put Ralph, now Ralph was the one who really knew lumber. That was all the experience he had had. And they put him, and they put, well, in something that in no way was connected with the business that he knew. He was just a straight soldier, I think. But he was sent to France because he went to the hospital to see Murray. And he may have been the one who told us how badly Murray was injured. And you see, he was injured. He was shot. He was in the first battle that he was in. He lost his arm and his leg was very badly. And they thought for a while they might have to take off his leg.
Yeah.
And when Ralph got there at the hospital, they had decided they could save his leg. And he did. He lost his right arm.
Mm-hmm. Are any of your brothers still living?
What is it?
Any of your brothers still living?
No, my brothers are all gone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 91 years old, you know, and they weren't blessed with as long lives as
Yeah.
I did.
What was the Armistice Day in Perry like?
What was what?
Armistice Day when the war ended. No,
Oh.
November 11th, 1918.
Oh, it was the happiest day as far as I was concerned that I can remember. I can't remember what we did, but I'm sure we just did a lot of happy things.
Mm.
Oh, war is such a terrible thing to me. And I have lived, my grandfather was in the Civil War. My father's generation missed it, you see. Then I had all three brothers two brothers, because Charlie was not really in the war. Murray and Ralph were in the next war. And then let's see, their children would be I've had, up to my children, my grandchildren were in this. And my son was in P.T. Boat executive.
He was.
Mm-hmm. He was in the same outfit that
Kennedy?
which one of the
Kennedy.
Kennedys.
What's your son's name?
Hmm?
What's your son's name?
My son's name is what is his name anyway? We all call him Bill. His name, I guess, is Ralph William. Is his name Ralph? Yeah, his name is Ralph William.
Does he live in Perry?
No, he lived in Tulsa. But he had, I don't know how many of his boys. He has 4 boys. And Jeff was he went to Vietnam. And Chris was in Germany for 3 years at the time of the Vietnamese War. And Mike was in the Navy. He graduated from Annapolis. Mike is a lieutenant commander in the Navy now. We're awfully proud of him. Mm-hmm. And Rick, I think his youngest boy was the only one that wasn't in the war. So I've just had so much war in my life that war just makes me cringe.
Yeah.
I
And you say he lives in Tulsa?
No, he was you see, he was going to school over here at Stillwater, and he wanted to be a forester, and they didn't have the forestry department developed over there then. And so a cousin of my husband's came down from Iowa, and he lived very close to Iowa State. And he said they have an excellent forestry department up there. So he took my son home with him, and he enrolled up there and graduated from the forestry department at Iowa State. And he was in his senior year when the war came up. And the day that of Pearl Harbor, I never will forget, we tried all day to get that boy to tell him not to enlist immediately. He was a senior, he was almost through, and for him not to enlist to finish his college if there was a possibility of it. And we couldn't get him. The lines were just, distraught. And anyway, as soon as we got word from him, they had come in and enlisted, or whatever it was, these boys. And the ones that were seniors, they said the Navy wasn't ready for them, and for them to go ahead and finish out their senior year and graduate. And then Bill was sent to Chicago, and let's see. At that time, if you wanted to go to, and that's all he wanted to go into was PT boat. Mm-hmm. And if you wanted to go into a PT boat, I'm not sure that you had to have some sort of you had to at least notify the parents. But he was engaged to a girl, and he was hoping to be married, and I think they were married before he went. And he wanted to be sure that she, so I don't think they contacted us. I think they contacted her. And anyway, to go into the PT boat, it was considered a very dangerous thing. But that was the only thing he wanted to be in. So he served all the war in the PT boat. Mm-hmm. That was Ralph William. Mm-hmm. And then he married, and they had 4 boys and 1 girl.
And he lives in Tulsa now.
Mm-hmm, they live in, no, not Tulsa. They live in Sapulpa. They have 3 boys that live in Tulsa, so we...
Okay. In the 1920s, were there many flappers in Perry?
Flappers?
Yeah.
I was pretty soon after I was married, wasn't I? I was married in 1916.
That was in the 20s, 21 to 29.
I remember the word very clearly, but I can't remember exactly what a flapper was.
I understand they're the girls that wore the short dresses, and bobbed their hair.
Oh, well, we all did that. Maybe I was a flapper. I don't know. I don't think I was, though, because I teach at school, and I'm sure I was very proper.
Were you teaching school in the 20s?
No, let's see. I didn't teach after. Oh, I was lucky. I began teaching here in Perry and had just an ordinary school, And up at Red Rock, there was a man on the school board whose sister-in-law had graduated in primary schoolwork. And she knew everything that a primary school teacher ought to have. Mm-hmm. And they had built a schoolhouse, and they built a long room, the width of the schoolhouse, it was out, you went out on the ground floor, but the people upstairs had to come down steps. And in that room, she had everything that anybody could have wanted to teach a primary room. And at Christmas time, she was operated on for appendicitis and died. And this man that was on the school board, her brother-in-law, happened to know me just slightly. He didn't know me very well, but they offered me the job. And I don't know whether I quit a job here in Perry. I kind of think I did to go up there. Oh, nobody could ever have had a more beautiful setting than I had to teach that primary room. And because, as I've told you, it was just perfect. But the next year, the Todds moved to Ponca City. Mr. Todd, this Mr. George Todd, built the refinery that Marlin bought from him. Mr. Todd built the first refinery in Ponca City, and Marlin bought it from him. And the Todd family moved up there while he was building that refinery. Well, of course, the girls and I were great friends, and in the summer they had a big party and a big luncheon and invited me up. And they said, why don't you go to Ponca City and teach? Now, Marlin, you see, was just there. And I thought, well, that'd be great. That'd be great. That'd be a lot more fun than teaching in Red Rock. You see, I wasn't devoted to the teaching cause. I was having a good time, pretty much. And so, come to happen, as it happened, the president of the school board in Ponca City was one of my father's best friends. He was a lumberman, and he and my father had known each other from the time they both of them started lumber companies. And well, he just gave me the school like nobody's business. I had a school just to put my hand out. And I went to Ponca City. So I was there when they built the first Marlin home. They built that the year I was there. I saw all the beginning of the Marlin, well, what do you call it? Terribly good times.
How long were you in Ponca City?
I was there 1 year, just the 1 year.
Did you know Mr. Marlin?
I met Mr. Marlin. I met Mrs. Marlin. One of the Todd girls and Mrs. Marlin were very good friends, and the Marlins at that time were living in that, is the Ione Hotel? No, what was the name of that hotel? Well, it was the hotel where Lou Lentz lived. But the Marlins were there, and so when I went to visit, went up to this luncheon that they had, my friend Olive Todd said, would you like to go up and meet Miss Marlin? And I said, well, yes, of course, Miss Marlin didn't mean much to me. They hadn't built anything or done anything yet. We went up to her room, and his sister was there, and they had 2 sewing machines, and they were making summer dresses. And I never saw so much ruffling in my life. The rooms were just full of ruffling. They were making summer dresses. And that was the way I met Mrs. Marlin. But I never knew Mrs. Marlin particularly, you know. I mean, I was having a good time with people my own age.
What year was that?
Oh, heavens, I wonder, I suppose I could figure out. Because I came home from Ponca City, and that's when I began to go with Ralph that summer.
That was before you were married then?
Yes, before we were married. But by September, things were just going real good, and they needed a teacher down here. So I resigned my teaching job at Marlin and came back and taught at Perry. And Ralph and I were married the 27th of December, so I only taught a half a year. And the mothers of the kids that I quit when I got married just got after me something terrible. They said I was, everything.
Did you quit teaching when you were married?
I quit teaching.
Yeah.
I think I was a very, very self-centered, absolutely inconsiderate sort of person. I'm just sure I was. But I'm sure I wouldn't have acknowledged it.
How did the Depression in the 30s affect you and your family?
Well, not too bad. We didn't have it too bad. I'll tell you why. We had never, in my own family, my own mother was a very, what do you call it? She was careful. She was an excellent cook. She never wasted anything. You see, she was brought up by my grandmother, who was a step-grandmother. Her own mother had died when she was 8 years old, and Grandpa remarried, and fortunately married a woman from England who had grown up in England, a wonderful, wonderful woman. And she was the mother that my mother knew, and had trained her very well. And so my mother was very careful about everything. She made good use of everything. My father's a lumberman, but we had a family of 4, and we didn't have any money to waste. my mother made the best of everything. Well, Mother Treeman was even better than my mother. You see, and I lived with Mother Treeman quite closely for a good deal of the time. Well, all the rest of my life, in fact, because she lived here across the street. We were always very, very close. Mother Treeman was a lovely, lovely woman. And we never wasted anything. So it really wasn't too hard for us. It was people who had always lived probably extravagantly that I think found it too hard. But we ate simple things, and we grew gardens, and we did all those sort of things, you know. And, I can't remember that the Depression was hard on us at all. We had a supply of clothes that, all right, just right now, I haven't bought any clothes for about 4 or 5 years, and I don't intend to. And it was just that way then. We had a supply of clothes. We didn't have to worry about getting. I think perhaps we had a little trouble with, like sheets and pillowcases and things like that, we had to substitute and do things. But I can't remember that the Depression was extremely hard on us. I think there were people who found it quite hard.
Were there any soup lines in Perry?
Hmm?
Were there soup lines in Perry?
Soup lines? I don't know. I don't remember. I don't remember whether there were. I kind of have a feeling there weren't, but there may have been.
Mm-hmm. And were you living in Perry when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That was one of the most terrible
Now, you
days.
tried to contact your son in Iowa State, but what was your first reaction when you heard the news?
Well, of course, the first reaction was we didn't want him to enlist immediately. We wanted him. He was so near through, and sending him up to Iowa hadn't been any little trick, you know. We were helping him. He worked. He had a job all the time he was there. But we helped him. We were behind him. And we had a daughter in school. She graduated. They graduated about, there were just a year's difference in our two oldest children. And she graduated about the same time. And then we had another one coming on. And, you know, it was just we just couldn't bear to not have him finished. Yeah. So he'd be ready. We didn't expect the war to last forever, and for him to have something ready that he could go into. My family, I don't know whether other people feel this way. I don't know how you were brought up, but I have a son-in-law who has a boy, and while he was in college, my son-in-law is an electrician, and while he was in college, all those boys are in college. I guess they're not bothering your car. There are a couple of girls out there. Mm. And he kept saying to his boy, you must get skill, a skill you can sell. You must, from your college work, you must have a skill you can sell. He never got it across to his boy. His boy now is out of whatever he was in, and he's having a very difficult time. And his father has offered to send him back to college to get marketable skill. He's still talking about that. You go back to college and get a marketable skill, and I'll pay for the college. And so I don't know how I got, but that has always been. And when our boy went to school up in Iowa, we wanted him, when he got out, to have some way of making a living. We didn't expect the war to last forever. Yeah. And we wanted him to have a graduate degree in forestry so he could get a job. And that was the thing we were more concerned about, I think, than anything else, that he not just jump out and enlist and not get his degree. But the Navy, right, I fixed that. They just told those seniors, say, well, we're not ready for you yet. Mm-hmm. And you just get your degrees.
Did he go into forestry after the war?
Yes. He was in the State Forestry Department here in Oklahoma for quite a long time. And then he had a chance to buy a hardware store, and he went into hardware business and did excellently. He's already retired, and he's, how old is Bill? Well, anyway, he's a very young retired man. But he had some lucky things happen to him in the way of inheritances, and he's retired.
That's good. Did you do any work for the war effort in World War II?
Did he?
Did you?
Did I? Well, except that little down there when I sold, what do we call them?
Now, that was World War
Duffel
I.
bags. For World War II.
Yeah.
What did I do for World War II? I don't know. I have to ask the children. They'd know better than I would. I had, my daughter Elizabeth was a wave, and Bill was in PT. John was in Coast Guard. What did Francie do anything? My kids were all, I can't remember that we in World War II had anything like that sewing thing. I don't believe we had anything like that for World War II.
You say your daughter Elizabeth was a wave?
Yes, she was she got to a higher degree. She was a first lieutenant when Bill was never, he never got his first lieutenancy. But Elizabeth got her. She was at Baltimore, and she had graduated from college. In fact, she was I can't think of the word, but she enrolled students at the college and that sort of thing. And they sent her, when she enlisted, to Bryn Mawr. And she went to Bryn Mawr, and when she got out of Bryn Mawr, she was a ensign, I guess. Yes, I'm sure an ensign. And this man at Baltimore wouldn't take anyone except officers in the waves. So she went there, and degaussing, did you ever hear of degaussing?
No.
That's what they did to ships to make them impervious to, there was something they put around ships to keep them safe. And the fellow that was in charge of degaussing at Baltimore, he took Elizabeth under his shoulder, and she worked with him all the time. And she went clear up to her. She got her first lieutenancy before she got out of the Army, before she got out of the waves.
Yeah. Where does she live now?
Well, she lives here. She's this big book that I showed you here. She's an editor for Abrams Publishing Company in New York. And she married a Dutchman. Well, what happened to her? She after she got out of the waves, she came down to Oklahoma University and was taking a graduate course. And one day there was something put up, and she had a little experience teaching, and she didn't like to teach. She wanted to get into something else. And it said that there was going to be a publishing course at Radcliffe, and any graduate English student could apply for it. Well, she immediately applied for it and was accepted immediately. So she went to this publishing course at Radcliffe. Well, when she was just about through, she went over to Harvard. Of course, Radcliffe and Harvard, I think, are in the same town, and applied for a job. Well, the next day, she got called on the carpet, and they said to her, "Listen, you're not supposed to be going out and applying for jobs. We're going to furnish you with a job." Well, the next day, Harvard called them up and wanted her to come back. They wanted to talk to her again. So she went back, and she was on the Harvard University Press staff for 5 years. Well, that, of course, gave her a marvelous, experience. And Abrams, and while she was at Harvard, she married a Dutchman fellow. He was not an exchange student. His father was a wealthy doctorate. He wanted him to get a doctorate from Harvard. Well, he was never half as ambitious as his father, so he got a master's, but he didn't get a doctorate. And anyway, he and Elizabeth were married and went to Amsterdam, and she lived in Amsterdam for 25 years. Well, by that time, he decided he wanted a Dutch wife, and so he got him a Dutch wife, and Elizabeth came home. And she's worked, though, all these years for Abrams. You know, the Abrams art publishing books. And that's what she does. And right now, she's in Amsterdam.
Does she live in New York?
She lives here.
In Perry?
Yes, she lives here. But she was working on this book when she came. And it's this golden age of Dutch art. And it's going to be it was supposed to be 600 pages. They have cut it down some, but she's working on it.
Now, what's her name now, her last name?
Her name is Willems, Willems, Elizabeth Willems. And she came back to Perry, and she had lived in Holland all that long time, and had never had any connection with, well, she worked on books all the time, you know, and her housework, and he belonged to, he had a lovely family, and the nice part of it is his whole family are absolutely devoted to Elizabeth. He was the only one that went off and got him a Dutch wife. Well, anyway, she was on the library board, she was on the museum board, she was on the session of the church. Every kind of a job they could give her, they gave her. Well, in the library board, she had to write the minutes one time, and she said something in the paper, and the mayor didn't like, and she got the dickens. And they never did put in the names of the library board. She got the full brunt of this difficulty in the newspaper over what she had said in those minutes. And so then the museum board, the curator of the museum, you know what's going on out there, don't you? Or do you know
Just
anything?
basic.
What?
I'm not that familiar with it.
You're not that one?
I'm not that familiar with it, with what's been going on out there.
Well, you know, of course, it is being completely done over. And the old curator that was there, you know, she made a terrible, well, I don't know whether she's through with it yet or not. She went to law about it. And she began, though, as soon as they began to fix that library, that museum, she had an idea. Of course, she'd been in the museum. She had been the curator ever since it was there. She had an idea how she wanted it fixed. Well, of course, they weren't asking her. They were doing it the way the library set it up. And Elizabeth did everything she could. She talked to the curator. She said, get along with them. Don't keep constantly causing difficulty and trouble. But she did, and they finally fired her. And she took it to court. And I don't know whether it's out of court yet or not. But Elizabeth would not have anything to do with it. And I said to her, Elizabeth, I said, I don't think you need to feel that you have to, because you talked to that girl, you knew her, and you talked to her every chance you had about getting along. You'll be much better off when this thing is finished if you get along with these people that are working here. But she paid no attention. And so she's out. I thought maybe you'd been here enough that, of course, the whole town knows about it. And I don't know. I don't know how. I don't know whether it's the court case. I think it was finished against her. I think that it was decided against her because not one on the library board agreed with her. I think they all had the same feeling Elizabeth had, that if she had just been agreeable, some arrangement would have been made for her at the end. But you just can't work with someone. Well, anyway, so Elizabeth, everything she got into some kind of a mix-up. And they were having something about the waterworks. And she said to the fellow that runs the waterworks, I want to come down and see what the waterworks is like now. I want to know whether I want to vote for this thing or not. He said, don't come down there. You get into a fuss with everything. But anyway.
I have a question.
Yes.
When did you find out that we had dropped the atomic bomb on Japan? Did it make the newspapers?
Oh, I'm sure I always have read it.
What was your reaction when you heard about it?
Terrible, terrible. And I don't know what other people's reactions are, but I never could see how Harry Truman could order that to be done. I never could see. It's a nightmare to me, really, that atomic bomb being dropped on Japan. It's a nightmare to me yet.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, I don't know how he ever expected to meet his maker after he ordered that thing done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Harry Truman was a religious, thoughtful man. I don't know how he could have done it. I just don't. I had a terrible reaction to it.
Were there big celebrations in Perry when World War II ended?
I can't remember. I suppose so. I think the end of every war is time for. I don't think I did much with Perry. I was just so thankful to have it over and know that my boys and my children were going to have a chance. I didn't want them to have war all their lives. I wanted them to have something else.
Mm-hmm.
War is a nightmare to me. It's just a nightmare. I don't think it accomplishes anything. I just don't have any feeling that it does.
Well, do you have any stories you can tell me about your grandparents or anything that you haven't told me already?
Oh, I suppose I've left out an awful lot of them. I don't know. I haven't any idea.
Well, I think we have a good interview.
What?
I think we have a good interview.
Well, I never was interviewed before, so I have the least idea. And I'm sure I've chattered on because that's always been my weakness.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I say now. I get started on a letter and I say, well, I know you remember that I'm 91 years old and I've never gotten over chattering.
One more question.
But
One more question. How come your father decided to come to the Strip opening?
well, I think it was just an opportunity that was right before him, and in his business, you see, he was established in the lumber business. That's the business that he had been working. You see, I told you he was an auditor. He never, if he ever was connected with one lumber yard, I don't know. He probably must have been as a very young man. Yes, I know, that's the truth. He was teaching school, and he he was in the country, and he came to Chanute, and there was a lumber company there, and they knew how good he was at figures, and they offered him a job in this lumber company. Well, his father was still having a terribly hard time with this big family, and my father would come home and give his father his check every month that he got from teaching school. And so when this lumber company offered him a job, his father was the one that was worried because he didn't know. And he said, I'm going to make more working for this lumber company than I did teaching school, and you can still depend on the same amount that I gave you when I was teaching school. And so he began working in that lumber company in Chanute. But it wasn't long until he was doing this auditor's work. I think it was because he was so particularly good in figures and everything, you know, and of course they didn't have the things to work with then that they have now. I think they did it all with a pen and pencil and books. And my father was very, very good at that. And that was one of the sadnesses of my father's life. My brother, there was nothing that my father admired as much as nice handwriting. Oh, he just admired beautiful handwriting. And every one of us in the family, except his brother Murray, who lost his right arm, we wrote horrible handwriting. But Murray wrote beautifully. Murray was very artistic, and he wrote just a beautiful hand. And I think the loss of his arm and the loss of that one in the family that could write a beautiful hand was terrible. I mean, that was a part of the terrible blow to my father.
Mm-hmm.
But Papa he was so, I'm sure, extra good at that sort of thing. And yet, he was only 27 years old, and I think this country opening down here was sort of something wonderful. And to come down here and get a complete start a lumberyard, and of course you had the beginning of a family. And I have, in December of this year, Perry will have been my home for 90 years.
90 years.
I'll be 92 in September. And you see, I was 2 years old when I came. So in December, I will have lived. This has been my home all those years. I've never had a home anywhere else. I think that's something of a record.
Yes, I think it is.
And I think
What day in December?
Huh?
What day?
I don't know. I haven't any idea. It was a few days, a little before Christmas. We got settled by Christmas. So it was earlier in December, but I don't have any idea what day.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mrs. Treeman, I want to thank you.
Well, I hope it's been what you want.
Yes, ma'am, definitely.
And if it isn't, you come back and I'll correct it. Someone called and wanted to know if I would have someone come and interview me from Stillwater on the old buildings in Perry. And so I said yes. And I've never heard, no one's ever called again. And I thought it was from the museum. So I asked Mrs. Stratton, and she said, well, that was a Chamber of Commerce project. And she said probably it was the Chamber of Commerce offices, but they never contacted me again. But I got a whole lot collected in my mind and thought on the old buildings in Perry. And so but they never came back. I made a list not only of all the old buildings that I knew, but I tried, and I don't think it's complete, all the buildings, memorial buildings that we have in town. And the memorial things like memorial windows and things like that in buildings. I made just as much of a list as I could of all that sort of thing. Because I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, that is. I'd like to. You have that list now, or could I take a look at it?
Well, I don't know whether you can read it or not. I'm not real sure. Let me see. I think it's out there so far that I take glasses.
What was her name?
Lucy Minor Boys. I took some stuff out to the museum about her. Everything I had
She was
about
the
her.
first county superintendent.
She's the first county superintendent.
And she made
But
the run.
she made the run and got her farm out here. She had one farm. He had 11. She got one of the best oil fields in Oklahoma on her farm. And he never got an oil well on a single one of his. And Ralph was just as bad. We had 3 or 4 farms. And he was always getting. And I said if Ralph could have gotten one smell of oil, he would have been happy. We never even got a sign. So I've got a little oil well out here on one of the farms that my son uses. I said, now listen, in my will, I have 3 farms. I said, in my will, if oil is found on any of those farms, you kids all profit from it equally. But this one farm, I lived through so many dry holes, I'm gonna have this little well. Well, I don't get very much out of it, but at least I have it.
Yeah.
And so, these cookies are not too good, but these little things, I said, yeah. Well, we got married at home, and we had the horse and buggy already. But he said we had relatives all over that county. And he said, we just started out in our horse and buggy, and we visited all of our relatives. That was our wedding trip. And he was a track man. And Dr. Lou, for which Lewis Field was named, was his coach. He was the coach of the track team. And a few years ago, I guess the track man or whoever in charge of that decided that the track just hadn't had enough attention paid to it. So they went back through and they found Ralph's name, and they couldn't find Ralph Treeman anywhere. And here we were, been in the telephone book ever since. Well, anyway, a boy came over here and got a job at one of the county offices. And my son that lives here with me has a farm out. He has one of these farms of mine. And he went out to that office for some reason one day, and he said his name was Treeman. And he said, well, did you ever hear of Ralph Treeman? Well, he said, that was my dad's name. And he said, well, over at Stillwater, they're just hunting for Ralph Treeman. And then he told him, and well, pretty soon they were coming over here to see us, and they had this big banquet. And our whole family, they wanted us to include a whole family to come to that banquet, because for 5 years, I believe it was, Ralph held the record in the 100-yard dash for any school west of the Mississippi. It was a record that was held longer by, I guess, the track team over there than any other. So he was named first. He got the first award, and my boys received it for him. And it was a long, long time coming.
Yes. When did he go to OSU or A&M?
Oh, when did Ralph go to A&M? As I told you, wasn't he 7 years older than I am? 5 years, 7 years older than I am. 7 years older than I am. When did Ralph go? Oh, I don't know. I'm sure the dates are on there. Anyway, he was, goodness me, he was a young man. Now, 7 years is a good deal different.
Well, he must have gone to A&M in the very early days of A&M.
Yes, it was the early days of A&M. But you see, well, this is what it was. We didn't even have a high school here in Perry. That was it. We had the grade schools, and we had an old man that in one of the churches, he would let high school students come there. He didn't have any special classes, but he'd teach them high school subjects. Well, I think that Ralph and his brother were going down there, and the older brother decided he wanted to go over to OSU.
Yeah.
Did you want to smoke?
No, I don't smoke.
Oh, I thought you were smoking.
No, this is a tape.
And so they found out about the preparatory school. So Ralph went over and went through the preparatory school. He took his preparatory work for A&M over there. And then he only went, he went 2 or 3 years. He did 2 or 3 years of college work. Well, Dr. Lewis was one of his best friends, Dr. and Ms. Lewis. And when we were married, we had these 2 babies. We had a baby 1 year, and we didn't have any children for 3 years, and then we had a baby just 1 year. And when we got down to Gates, there was Dr. Lewis and his wife. They just loved Ralph.
At the football games?
And they'd meet us, and they'd go to the car with us. They'd always go out to the car with us. Ralph just adored Dr. Lewis. And
did you know Dr. Lewis?
What?
Did you know Dr. Lewis?
Well, I didn't do him that much. You see, I never went to school in Stillwater at all. And I knew them because they came down to the car. They waited at the gate. You see, we were always up ways and we didn't take any chances with those kids, have to carry them down. And So we were always, kind of late. And by the time we got down to the ground, here were Dr. and Ms. Lewis, because they were interested in Ralph, and they were interested in me and
What
the
was
baby.
Dr. Lewis like?
Oh, he was a charming man, just a charming man. But what they'd always do, Dr. Lewis would say to me, make Ralph come back and get his degree. He said, it's just a shame that Ralph never did stay and get his degree. I said, listen, Ralph's having about all he can do to make a living for us. I'm not going to encourage him to come back and get a degree, but Dr. Lewis wanted him to come back and get his degree. But I don't think he ever missed the time that we ever met him. He said, oh, I'll get Ralph to come back and get his degree.
Did your husband ever talk about going to school in Old Central?
Oh, I think he went to school in Old Central. They have all kinds of pictures of him over there. While Ralph was ill for quite a long time before he died. And I think he realized he wasn't, I think the doctor told him he wasn't going to live very long. He died of a heart attack. And he got a whole lot of things together and took them over there. And we went to Old Central, and we went into a room, and they had one of those old-time secretaries that has drawers at one side and a desk at the other. And they opened one of those drawers and just shoved these things. Ralph took a bunch of stuff over there. Well, Mary Taylor was a woman here in town who had gone over there, and Ralph's mother told Mary about Ralph's thing, and Mary said, I'm not going to give him anything till I'm gone. She said, I've got a lot of things, but I'm not going to give him anything till I'm gone. Mm-hmm. Well, one day, they're just doing a whole lot of Old Central now. Did you know it? Mm-hmm. Oh, they're really working on it. And this man who's in charge of it, if anybody from Perry was there, he told them that if they knew me, to tell me that he wanted me to come over there. So one day when we were on our way to Sapulpa, I said, now we want to start early enough that I can go to Old Central and meet this man and see what it is. Well, what he wanted me to do was to identify any of the things that they hadn't been able to identify if they were things that Ralph brought. But he just brought, I bet he brought a dozen pictures that had Ralph in them. They must have taken pictures all over the place when Ralph was on that track team, because he was in every one of these pictures he brought out.
Did you identify all of them?
I identified Ralph in that, and a few of the things that Ralph had given. I didn't pay attention to the things that Ralph gave. They didn't mean anything special to me. I just went with him when he gave them. His mother thought he was very foolish to do it. She didn't think he should take him over there. I don't know. Well, anyway.
Is Mary Taylor still living?
No, she's not living. And I asked him about that. I said, now, do you know? And so he checked on it, and he said they had never been given. And I said, well, she was a home ec student. And I checked with the home ec department, and the head of the home ec department was very much interested. And she checked, and she let me know. She said she never brought anything here. And so I thought her niece that she went to live with after her husband died, I wrote to her up in Kansas, and she said, I can't understand it. She said there was a man came and talked to Mary, and she said, I thought Mary gave him the things that she had, so I don't know. But I gave him, you see, Mary graduated in 1903. She was a graduate student. And she graduated in 1903, Mary Nielsen, and he took her name, and I said, now you, as you go through things, these things you have, you be sure to notice if there is anything here. And I sent him the letters that Mary's niece wrote to me. And I had an awfully nice letter back from him.
That was his name Showalter?
I believe it is. I don't know.
Jim Showalter's
I never
curator.
can remember his name. I think his name is Showalter.
Yeah, that's Jim Showalter. He's curator of it. Very
He's
nice.
in charge of it.
Yeah, very nice person.
Well, and now he told me that they were just awfully hampered because he said that building is just falling apart. Mm-hmm. And they're having to do so much construction work on it. And so he said they're doing much more in that than they are in, working with putting up exhibits and things like that. They want to get the place so it's not going to fall down.
Is there anyone else in Perry that went to A&M? Is there anyone else living in Perry that went to A&M in those
In the
days?
old days,
Yeah.
I don't know. Of course, Ralph was 7 years older than I am, so you know they wouldn't be they wouldn't let him be living that were Ralph's age. But we have a large number going from now. I think the majority of our high school graduates go to OSU. We have many more going there than go to OU.
Yeah.
Now, my family went to OU. They didn't let him go to OSU. Of course, Bill went over there and couldn't get forestry, so he went up there.
Yeah.
Elizabeth got her master's degree from OU. Francie's a graduate of OU, so I shouldn't say that. But my youngsters went to OU.
That's where I went to both schools, OU and OSU.
Well, you see, my children, Elizabeth first graduated at Park College. It's a Presbyterian school up by Kansas City. And Elizabeth, to this day, thinks the little college is the best place for a kid out of high school. She encourages every kid that gets out of high school to go to a small school first. And she just thinks Park College thinks to her that nothing else could have. And then she got her master's degree down at OU. And of course, the other things, I don't know I don't think she ever got any recognition for those 5 years at Harvard. I don't know whether she got anything for that or not. She was 5 years on the staff. She went through, let me tell you, if a girl from Oklahoma ever had a hard time, she had it. That staff were mostly women. And she was a girl from the sticks. Oh, they treated her terribly. But I want to tell you that the one girl, her mother was a doctor. Her mother and father were doctors in New York. And they had been studying in Europe. And she had most of her education in Europe. And she was a snob if there ever was one. But by the time Elizabeth had worked there 5 years, she was her best friend. She won over every single one of them. and only she was ornery. I didn't think there was any credit to her that she separated the head of the Harvard Press from his wife and married him. So she and her husband visited Elizabeth when she was living in Holland a time or two.
Well, what kind of memorials do you have in Perry?
What is it?
You say you have a list of the memorials in Perry?
This was what I was going to see what there is here. I'll read off what this is all done in such a hurry that let me see. When Dr. Sides came to Perry, there were 3 stone buildings. The one that he was in was the second one built. The first one is on the north side of the square. His is on the west side of the square, and there was a 1-story stone building on the south side of the square.
Are they still standing? Are those buildings still standing?
Those are all standing. Yes, they're all standing in good condition too. Well, I don't know. The one on the north side of the square, you see, a number of years ago, the president of the Exchange Bank, his son-in-law, yes, has more coffee if there is any. I think there is a little. The president of the Exchange Bank, his son-in-law came back here from California, and he began restoring buildings. And the first one he restored was the oldest one. That was the one on the north side of the square, and he restored that building. And then he also did all the restoration that was needed on the folk art building. Not a great deal, but what was needed. And the building on the west side of the square, the Globe building, has Globe up over the top. That's the one Dr. Sides had his office in for 63 years. And it was the second building. And then there were several other stone buildings built rather soon after that. I don't know any particular names for them, but let's see now. Here I had in the Christian church. It's on 7th Street, and Mr. E.D. Nims. You see, we had a telephone company that was beginning of Southwestern Bell that was organized in Perry. Mr. E.D. Nims, and Mr. Noble, and Mr. Who was the third one? Westervelt. E.D. Nims, Westervelt, and Noble organized the Pioneer Telephone Company. They went, Mr. Westervelt and Mr. Noble went to Oklahoma City. E.D. Nims went to St. Louis and was later president of Southwestern Bell. When Elizabeth got her degree from what was that school? It's in St. Louis, Washington University. When she graduated from Park College, that's where she got her master's, I think. She had a scholarship to Washington. Well, they sent us a catalog, and here Mr. E.D. Nims was on the Board of Regents. So my husband wrote to him, and he invited Elizabeth to his house because, you see, Ralph's father had been treasurer of that early telephone company, and they tried their best to get him to go with them. But my Uncle Hiram was an older man, and he knew Papa Treeman had 3 boys, and I think he thought 3 boys in Perry was better than 3 boys in St. Louis. And he thought Papa Treeman was better set up. And he persuaded Ralph's father to stay here and not go with the telephone company. But Mr. Nims had always been very, very fond of Ralph's father. And he was the one who tried hardest to get Ralph's father to go. So he invited Elizabeth to his house. He was at then national or international president of Boy Scouts. And they were having a meeting in St. Louis. And the night that he invited her there to dinner, they went to that meeting. So she got to be up in the president's box with him at that national meeting of the Boy Scouts. Oh, she had a wonderful, wonderful time. And Mr. Nims was so nice to her, and she liked him so much. Well, he was not a churchman himself, but he had put a beautiful window in the early Christian church here, which was down here on 1st Street. And so when they built their new church up where it is now, Mabel Donahue, did you ever know Mabel Donahue? You missed something. She was one of the grandest women there ever was. She was the chairman of one of the committees on building that church. And she wanted so bad to move that old window. But she was smart enough. She had glass detectors come here, and they told her it would never stand it. The glass was too rotten, that the window would never stand being moved. So she got in touch. I think we gave her E.D. Nims' address, and this long window, which is not on 1st Street. It's not on it's on 7th. It's on 7th, but you have to be on the inside of the church. It's just beautiful. It's back of where the ministers stand. It's a long window, and it's just beautiful, and Mr. Nims gave that. Now, somebody told me not long ago, and she absolutely thought she knew, she said that the glass out of that old window was put into that window. I don't believe she knew one thing about it. I didn't dispute her. But I'm positive that Mr. Nims gave this other window to replace the old one, because Mabel had a lot of correspondence.
It's a memorial?
It's a memorial to his mother. Mm-hmm. It was a memorial to his mother. And so that window, I think, is one. It's just if you go inside the church, it's just beautiful. And then there's an old stone fence. It's down this street on the corner of 8th and what would that be? Grove, Holly. I guess it's Holly. Mr. Todd, who was here, that was where his home was, the house you would never recognize. It's been changed so much. But he built that old stone fence when he was here in those early days. And they've taken down a lot of it, but I said, I hope they'll always leave the rest of that, because lovers have always sat on that stone fence. It's just an institution. And I think Mr. Todd's old stone fence is something that should be left. Then W.T. Little, he put the trees in the park in Perry, you see, and at the cemetery too. And there's some sort of a recognition of Mr. Little in the park. Jenny Forney, she's older, she's 95, they put in the trees outlining the road to the cemetery for honoring Jenny Forney. In our Presbyterian church, when it was rebuilt, they saved all the old windows, and they were all memorials. Maybe somebody tell me. Jenny Forney. Oh, then the Sunday school building at the Presbyterian church was a memorial to the Morgan, a farmer and his wife that were members. They furnished the money for that church, for that building. It's called the Morgan Building. And Aunt Lucy Boys, that I mentioned, it was the first county superintendent. When we wanted a library, she was on the library board. And who was our representative in Congress then? He lived over at Pawnee. Oh, I knew his name as well as anything. Well, she did all of the, and he gave us, the library owns clear up to the middle walk. And he gave us a great big batch of ground, but Aunt Lucy did all, and before she died, she brought all of the letters that she had on that to me, and I took them to the library. I hope they took care of them. Mm-hmm. But she was responsible for getting the ground for the library. And I imagine for a good deal of correspondence with Mr. Carnegie, probably, I don't know. But she was a good writer. I'm sure she was a good letter writer. And so those are the things that I had. Now they have the Lutheran bell. The bell on the Lutheran church is a memorial bell. Ruth Tabor, who was a teacher in high school, set up a high school scholarship. She died very suddenly while she was teaching down here, but she had set up, or else she seemed to not have any family. And J.C. Fleming, who was an early day man here in Perry, set up a college scholarship that the Masonic club handles here, the Masonic organization. And every graduate of Perry High School, if they can come up with the qualifications, can have that scholarship.
You say the bell in the Lutheran church is a memorial?
It's a memorial.
Who to?
I just don't believe I can tell you, but I know the wife, it's in memory of her husband, and she was a sister to the band that my husband was in partners with in that elevator, but I can't think of her name. But it's a memorial, I know. And Bertha Malzahn, now at the museum, they have put up something that they felt that she did more for the organization of the museum than anybody else. Mm-hmm. I'm not too sure, but then I wouldn't dispute it. Robert Donahue, that's Mabel Donahue's son, gave the ground for the museum. And then I have a list here of all the early day doctors. And then Hump Daniels, the football stadium is a Daniels. And then these other people that I think should be remembered, like David McKinstry, who had the Pride of Perry flower farm and got Perry on the map that way and had the mill. And let's see.
I'm glad I met you.
Thank you.
Dr. Sides was internationally known for iris. He had collections of iris. He went to every iris thing all over every place. And he had beautiful, beautiful iris. Henry Johnson and Ethel, of course, I think should be. But are you familiar at all with David Lilienthal? He was the first head of the atomic energy and then what was he doing? Well, his wife was from Perry. They have visited me here. Helen grew up across the street from me, and she and Dave have visited, and I visited them in New York and New Jersey where they lived. Of course, he was connected with Princeton. He died in Princeton. Yeah. And I hear from Helen all the time, but he was really an outstanding man. The John Devine Hall. John Devine was a coach here and won the hall out the football field. I guess I know where the John Devine Hall is. She told me that. I called her up and I said, there's some sort of memorial for John Devine. And she said, well, yes, John Devine Hall. Maybe at the schoolhouse. I don't know. And then in the early days, we always had picnics at Groves. And we had Skilling's Grove, and we had Kinnick's Grove, and we had Honeybus Grove. And that's where we always had our picnics and our celebration. Nobody knows where they even were.
Where were the groves?
Well, the Skilling's Grove was as you go First Street and cross the creek down there. It was north of just where you cross. There used to be all trees. And that was one of the very nicest places. And then the Honeybus Grove is just about where the swimming pool is now. That was a tree, not many houses down there. And then out on Black Bear, where I-35 crosses Black Bear, that's where we had our Sunday school picnics, was out there on Black Bear, because there's a little more water out there and you could do a little better wading. All we did was wade. Mm-hmm. But that was where we always had our celebration. Well, that's all the things I guess that I had written down here, except I do think I had, I don't know whether I had any more about the buildings. Well, I had here the land office, and it was here for 16 years, and the railroad station, which was moved up. They moved the railroad station up from Wharton because, we weren't it then. I mean, they called us Wharton. And the post office, I told you about the post office, didn't I? Mm-hmm. The post office, well, the merchants on the square, there were enough of them to build a post office. And rock, it was pretty, and they rented it to the city for $1 a year.
Is that building still there?
No, we have a new post office, not near as pretty as the old, and the old one was covered with ivy. Oh, it was just a pretty building.
He said this was called Wharton?
Wharton, yes. You see, yeah, the trains didn't stop at Perry, they stopped at Wharton. You'll have to get into that if you get a history of Perry, because we had a time, and they put the railroad station in Wharton. I think they moved it up here.
How far from Perry?
Oh, not very far. Not very far.
Who was it named after?
Huh?
Who was it named after?
I don't know. I haven't the least idea. It was, you see, the style of the town with the square. It was Hoke Smith, who was from down south, and he was under Cleveland, I think, and he designed all these towns around here. Enid has a square, a number of the towns that have squares, and that was this. That's what I read. That Hoke Smith was responsible for these buildings. Now let me see. There's a 3 stone buildings were Willison, Globe, and the one, I don't know what the one on the south side of the square was, just a 1-story building. And I told you about the no grades on the streets and the sidewalks, the way they were. I thought that was interesting. Dr. Sides, he got on the council for that reason. As quick as he could, as quick as he got enough practice that he could live, he got on the council so they could get the grades fixed, because he thought that was just terrible. He tells all about that. You can't get a copy of Dr. Sides' book, you see. It's just a very limited edition. And let's see. The first school building was built between E&F, and it was a stone building. The Farmers and Merchants Bank was the first bank building that was built. And the famous store, which was the big department store, was built by Mr. Lobbs. It's a Jew. And he made a mistake, and he got his lots in the middle of the square. So he traded them for these lots and built his building there, and that was the first general store that we had. Mm-hmm. And the nicest thing about it was that they had a little deal. They had where the cashier sat was up in an elevated place, and things went out, on wires. Yeah, were you ever in one of those stores that had, and every transaction you had to scoot it on the wire up to up to the and the Perry Mill, of course, David McKinstry and the Perry Mill, he really put Perry on the map with the Pride of Perry flour. And he was one of my father's very best friends. And
How was the mill run by steam?
I don't know how it was run. I really don't know.
Where is it located?
Well, it was down south. There's one big, they still use it, I think, for storage of grain that was on the property where the mill was. It was about 2 blocks off of the square south. From the middle of the south side of the square. It was just about, and they had a nice stone office in front, and then they had all the milling stuff behind. And he sold flour all over every place. Oh, and David McKinstry was just, he was just great. He stuttered, but it didn't stop him, not a minute. And he used to come, he didn't marry till late in life, and he would, after supper, he'd just go someplace where he'd come up to our house, and he never even looked at me. He didn't even know my father had a girl. But the 3 boys, he went and looked at all their work and found out whether they were getting their lessons and how they were getting along in school and everything like that. Well, one night, one of my brothers disappeared. And it was the night my oldest brother was graduating from high school. And supper time came, and my youngest brother was nowhere to be found. And the whole neighborhood was out. Everybody was out hunting for my brother. Well, right in the midst of it, here came a horse, a big old horse, and a big boy on it, and behind a little boy, and he had a string of frogs. And this kid had taken him out to Black Bear, and they had gotten frogs. Well, the whole family was upset because we were supposed to be getting ready to go to the graduation exercises. But Mr. McKinstry was there. You see, he lived a block up the street then. And he was out with all the rest of the neighbors helping. And he stayed, and I remember I was hanging around, listening. And he said, "Mac, if you whip that boy," and he stuttered every word he said, "I'll whip you." He thought that boy with that string of frogs.
Who was Perry named after?
It's named after, now I had that somewhere. It was somebody in Washington, I think. Maybe just a simple congressman. I can't remember. I'm sure that they probably, I probably have that out at the museum. I'm pretty sure they must have it. But it wasn't anybody that you would particularly remember. But, I think I named all those people that I thought were outstanding, but I expect somebody else would have some others. These were just the ones. Of course, Helen and Dave Lilienthal were just our dear. Well, Helen still is. I hear from her all the time. And Dave was just one of the nicest men that you ever could
Where does she
meet.
live?
She's living in a retirement home in New Jersey, close to Princeton. That's where their home was. And Helen she did every bit of. You see, he wrote. We have all of his volumes down at the library, and I've forgotten whether it's 12 or 13 that she's finishing up. And I imagine she'll send it. And she gave them here in memory of her father and mother who lived here. And I don't know whether anybody appreciates her or not. She sent them through me, so I don't know. And I imagine she's going to be sending some more. I know she told me she was still working on this last one. She did all of the secretarial work and saw to the printing. Hoke Smith, I said, under Grover Cleveland, was responsible for the square. And the first courthouse was built by the J.M. Richardson Lumber Company of Oklahoma City. And the Opera House was built by Joe Tate That was always oh gee, that used to be the center of everything.
Is that building still here? The Opera House?
I don't know about that is or not. There's a little bit left over there on the east side of the square. I don't think the library, that is though. And the Opera House, oh yes, Opera House. And the library was 1908. And Bird McGuire was our congressman. She did the writing for that. Now the places of beauty, in my estimation, I'll tell you this and then I'll let you go. Downtown at Christmas, our square is just beautiful. It really is. They do a beautiful job, especially the courthouse. They decorate the courthouse, and you can see it from way out on the hills out of town. And I think the courthouse, it was beautiful until they began the trees dying and they're not replacing them. We used to have a beautiful, beautiful. Now, of course, was Bill Little. He did all that, and he put the trees at the cemetery too. And the old First National Bank, of course, Oak Arch building, and that window at the Christian Church, the E.D. Nims building, and our Presbyterian windows are not to be sniffed at. They used them very beautifully, I thought, in the new church. And these were two houses in town that I admire. And Grace Hill Cemetery, I think our cemetery, if you get out, we went out there, early in the fall, I guess. It was just beautiful. We went out early in the morning. Beautifully taken care of it. If they take care of it like that all the time, it's just a beautiful place. And so I imagine there are other places other people would think of, but those are the ones I did.
Well, thank you.
Well, I expect I just talked too much for State of Oklahoma, Oklahoma Historical Society. Joe L. Todd. I can't read that. My glasses.
Oral historian.
Oral